This is Rad Power Bikes Rad Rover 1000 mile review. I like to talk about what it's like owning the bike, what maintenance I put into it, a wish list of future editions, and what you can generally expect once the newness factor dies off. Let's start with how the bike is held up. At about 50 miles, the main controller for the bike died. I read others having this issue, and once replaced, I have not had a problem. Perhaps they received a bad run of units. Rad replaced the part pronto, and there could be some debate if the issue is my own fault, which gets to my biggest concern. On a few occasions, I found water inside the frame, namely sitting in the bottom bracket. I did ride the bike through some wet weather and did clean it up well after, but when I put the bike up on a work rack and put it forward, water came out of one of the holes where the cables pass into the frame. I brought this issue up to Rad, and they said they had not heard of this, and if it was happening, I would have an electrical issue. Well, I did have an electrical issue, and water was definitely in there. I also didn't have fenders on at the time, which may have also impacted. The wet issues in the bottom bracket eventually took its toll and rusted it up. I had it replaced at about 300 miles. I'm now a lot more cautious of wet weather. Was this issue caused by my wet riding, or a design flaw of the bike is uncertain. I haven't really heard others complaining of it. Unfortunately, once I hit about 400 miles, I went through a series of flat tires. Nothing you can really do here as it's largely luck of the draw. I had a liner put in one of the tires in hopes to reduce the number of flats, and it did nothing. The worst part about getting a flat is you just can't walk the bike home. The bike becomes an anchor instantly. It's just too heavy, and if it's the rear wheel, it will quickly unseat, making pushing it useless, and even with the electric motor, it's not going to happen. One flat eventually ripped a hole in my tire, and at 800 miles, I put new tires on the bike. The rear needed it, as I do a bit of road riding, and I'm sure that riding on the beach may have sanded the tires down as well. But once again, flats are just one of those things you'll have to deal with. The only other maintenance that was needed was spoke tightening on the rear wheel at about 650 miles. The wheel started making clicking sounds, and I heard that you could break a spoke easily if you don't maintain them correctly. I did a little research, purchased a spoke wrench, and tightened them up. You will need to tighten the brakes up after every 50 to 150 miles, more so when you first break it in. While I usually have my local bike shop do it, you can easily do it yourself. I haven't needed to adjust my derailleur as much, and while I do use the shifter a fair amount, not nearly as much as a normal bike. The bike has held up well for the 1,000 miles of abuse I put on it. I do expect to see some rust sooner than later, as I've taken it to the beach a good amount of times and exposed it to the salt air. So far, I've been happy with how well the components have held up. I often take the battery off to charge it, and I've noticed that it started to scratch the frame near the top of the battery mount. This is happening from dirt getting stuck under the lip of the battery, and then when sliding it off it acts as sandpaper. Once again avoidable, but it's very easy to scratch this area of the bike, and I will likely wrap some tape around it to avoid further wear. As for a wish list of items, the first is the PAS switch. It's too small, it's hard to feel with gloves, and worst of all, it's too easy to press the button too many times. Too often when the bike is bouncing around, I go to change the PAS level and I click it too many times in the either direction. Throttle has too much play. You need about a quarter twist to get it to engage. I wasn't sure if this was just my particular unit, but I heard others complain of this, and I also have a Rad Mini, and that one's actually worse. So, the throttle just has too much play in it. I also wish there was a light to determine if the throttle is on or not. This becomes a little bit of a safety issue for me, because if I'm riding near a dock, I often want to make sure that some of the electronics are off, that doesn't jump away from me, and there's no way of really confirming it. I wish the grips locked in place. I find them moving around often, and generally they move to a position that they don't give me as much support as I like. Then there is the front shock. I have a lot of mixed feelings on it. I haven't used it a lot for a few reasons. The first revolves around the fender. Using a third-party fender, I fought a way to mount it that didn't interfere when the shock was engaged. I then found the shock a little soft, and others have complained about this as well. It works good on hard pavement and hard dirt, but I question if it was hurting me in the sand. I felt the shock was causing the wheel to dig into the sand more, especially during turns and dips. It adds a lot of weight to an already heavy bike. For the most part, it remains locked, and I'll continue to experiment with it, but an option not to have the shock I think is warranted. Finally, the shifter is far from the grip and it's not always easy to reach and grab. It is less of an issue on an electric bike, but I feel like I have to move my hand pretty well in order to shift at certain gears. The battery has been great. I find it hard to burn the battery down. It has a lot of power, charges fairly quickly, holds its charge, and goes the distance. And for comparison, my rides are usually across flat terrain, but the terrain may vary from pavement to dirt to sand. I also ride in high wind resistance at times. I'm usually at a PAS level of 2 or 3, and I use throttle occasionally to boost myself. I don't want to jinx myself here, but my chain has never come off. I am cognizant when I hear it bouncing around and may adjust my ride to not disturb it, but it has not been an issue. I will end with this. My dad wanted to purchase a Rover this past summer and there was no stock. He found another electric fat bike on sale similar in price and features. He did not have a front shock, which was actually, in my opinion, one of the nicer things that made his bike a little lighter. However, the bike was not meant to be shipped directly to the customer through mail order. When he received it, he got no tools, no instructions, no support. When he eventually got it all together, he found the bike had a very aggressive riding position that was uncomfortable for him. He later changed his seat and handlebars, and now he's good. What I'm getting at here is Rad Power Bikes have designed their sales model around mail order, customer service, and designing a bike to meet the audience that it's selling to. Comparing to my experience with my dad's was night and day, and it became a lot more clear the value Rad Power Bikes adds to their customers. My dad felt a bit helpless once receiving his bike, and I never felt that way with my Rover. He also had to modify it so that it worked for him, where with the Rover, it just seems to fit a more general audience. I hope you found this video of value. Please feel free to drop some comments, ask questions, like, and subscribe. Thank you.